Open your Bibles to the Gospel of John. Eventually, we're going to get to John chapter 12, but we're not going to begin there. We're actually going to begin in chapter 1. So, John chapter 12, I've titled this The End of the Beginning of the End, because that's what John is doing in his gospel here. First 11 chapters of John's gospel we can see as basically the first half of his gospel. And then the second half, he's going to be doing something different, something new, although it's a continuation. A little bit of a paradox there. So John chapter 12 begins a new movement, and we want to honor that today. Lazarus. So last week, John chapter 11, we walked through this resurrection, this raising of sorts of Lazarus from the dead. Lazarus becomes a prominent, pivotal transition piece for John, and that's how he uses it. He uses it as one of his signs in the Gospels. We'll get to that in a second. But we talked about Lazarus last week. He's prominent this week, and then next week as well. So this is all a piece of something John is doing in his Gospel. John puts Lazarus forth as a sort of segue sign, a point in his gospel where he transitions from Jesus' public ministry to what essentially is the last week of his life, with some commentary by John thrown on at the end. So first 11 chapters in John's gospel, Jesus' public ministry, his introduction into the world. But this last portion from John chapter 12 around to about John chapter 20, John spends more time than any of the other three Gospels talking about Jesus' last week in his life. And it's in John's Gospel. Most of John's Gospel is unique to his Gospel. You won't find it in Matthew, Mark, or Luke. So there's something important that John is about to head into. John is once again consistent with his MO, consistent with how he's doing things in the gospel, using signs, including this one. He gives great prominence to the sign of the resurrection of Lazarus from the dead as a sort of, if I could put it this way, as a sort of spiritual ultrasound, revealing the heart condition of, and we're going to walk through the signs. And you're going to see that each sign is a revealer of the heart condition of both individuals and even groups of people. And John gives us privy to their reaction to Jesus, his person and his works. And he uses the signs to do that. So, John chapter 1. We're going to start there. Eventually, I promise you, about 2 o'clock, we'll get to John chapter 12. So, John chapter 1, the prologue, that's what it's often referred to, the word before. First 2 verses. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was... I know it. We've been through this. I get it. But this is a transition point in John's gospel, and we need to honor that, and we need to go back to and remind ourselves, what is he doing with these signs? And the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. Now skip to verse 14. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Literally tabernacled among us. Pitched his tent. Totally an allusion to the Old Testament tabernacle. John is doing something here. And we have seen his glory. Glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. And then verse 17. For the law was given through Moses, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. John is doing a ton here. He's basically setting up his thesis, his main point for the gospel in John 1 through 18, in the prologue. He's telling us what he's going to do. The rest of John's gospel is defending verses 1 through 18. Now, this whole signs piece is intentional on John's part. John 20, near the very end of his gospel, John writes, Now, Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples. Many other signs. But John only intentionally selected a few, and we're going to get into that in a second, which are not written in this book. But these are written. But these signs are written. Why, John? Tell us. So that you may believe that Jesus is who he claimed to be. That Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. That's why he focuses on these signs. That's why he intentionally chose, out of all the signs that Jesus did, he intentionally chose these and wove them into his gospel. Still in John chapter 1, verse 10. Here's what he's doing with the signs. He, that is Jesus, was in the world, and the world was made through him. Yet the world did not know him. He came to his own, and his own people, that is the Jews, did not receive him. But to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he, that is Jesus, gave the right, gave the privilege to become children of God, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but born of God. There it is. That's why these signs are here. And John is going to use that premise and walk us through several signs, and he's going to give us insight and give us privy to the reactions of different kinds of people, individuals, and groups. Now, before we continue, a note on John's signs. There is wide agreement as to the 6 signs that I'm going to present today in the Gospels, culminating with Lazarus, in the resurrection of Lazarus. The question is there a 7th sign? It seems, in keeping with John's Gospel, that there actually would be a 7th sign. John, a couple of different times, uses the number 7 as a feature in his gospel. For example, John has the 7 I am sayings of Christ in his gospel. So it seems reasonable that there would be 7 signs in John's gospel. There is widespread agreement that there are 7 signs in John's gospel, but there is disagreement as to what the 7th sign is. The 6 signs we're going to walk through, widespread agreement on these 6 signs. The question is, what's the 7th? And I want to just quickly walk through that with you. There are 3 viable options. One option is some hold that Jesus' cleansing of the temple was also a sign. Another option is Jesus walking on the water was also a sign. I don't think, my personal opinion, I don't think those 2 fit well as a 7th sign or included in the 7. I'm going to get to, in just a second, don't put that up yet, guys. I'm going to get to Jesus' encounter with the Jews after the cleansing of the temple. And I think that gives us insight, that's my claim anyway, as to what the 7th sign is. But the sign of, or the possible sign of Jesus walking on the water, John ties it in so closely with the feeding of the 5,000 that I think that is actually one sign. And when we get there, I want to try and make that case, because we see a reaction of the disciples are there and the crowd or the people are there. It's the same group of people, and he juxtaposes them one after the other. So I think that is a sign singular. Here's where I land. I think the 7th sign, fittingly, I think is the resurrection of Jesus. I think that's the 7th sign. So in John chapter 2, we hear some, or read some commentary after Jesus, cord of whips, does his temple thing and all that. It was heavy. Check this out. John chapter 2, verses 18 through 22. So the Jews said to him, "What sign do you show us for doing these things?" For like, holy cow, you came in and you just obliterated the place. Says who? Who gives you that right? What sign? Jesus answered them, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." The Jews then said, they totally didn't get his metaphor there. "It has taken 46 years to build this temple, and you're going to raise it up into, how does that even work?" But, and John provides his commentary, but Jesus was speaking about the temple of his body. Now watch this. This is why I think the seventh sign is actually Jesus' resurrection from the dead. "When therefore Jesus was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this, and they," what's John's intent? What's the intent of the signs? "And they believed the scripture and the word that Jesus had spoken." So I land in the camp that the seventh sign is actually the resurrection of Jesus. Not going to be dogmatic about that. Not going to die on that hill. But I just put that out there. We good? Okay. All right, sign. So I've numbered the signs in keeping with, I believe, the resurrection of the seventh sign. So I've numbered the sign that way. All right, water into wine in John chapter 2, sign number 1. Verse 11. "This, the first of his signs, Jesus did at Cana in Galilee and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him." So John puts forth these several signs, and then he tells us what the reactions of the various peoples involved are. Now watch as we walk through these signs what happens with the reactions. The negative side begins to get ramped up, not initially, but eventually it begins to get ramped up. So sign number 1, reaction: those who received Jesus, those who did not receive Jesus. Those are the two groups. And when I get to the end of the message, I'm going to hammer that. Hammer it? Yeah. It is that simple. There are only two groups of people on this earth. Only two. Those who are in the kingdom and those who are outside of the kingdom. It is that simple. So, the reaction: receive Jesus. Jesus' disciples did not receive Jesus. None, at least as of yet. Now we'll begin to see that the religious leadership begins to, not so sure about this guy, but they're not there yet. Sign number 2, John chapter 4. This is the healing of the royal official's son. Verses 53 and 54 of John chapter 4. The father, that is the royal official, knew that was the hour when Jesus had said to him, "Your son will live." And he himself believed, and all his household. This was now the second sign that Jesus did when he had come from Judea to Galilee. So the healing of the royal official's son, I know we've walked through it. A man comes to Jesus: "My son is sick. Would you come and heal him?" Jesus kind of puts his faith to the test. "I know you. I know your kind. You're just like everybody else. You're only here for the magic show." No, sir. God is my witness. I know you can heal my son. Just say the word. I know you can heal my son. Please, please, please. Will you come back with me to Capernaum and heal him? And Jesus says, "Go. Your son will live." Now there's a tension. If the man continues to beg Jesus to heal his son, he will be guilty of just what Jesus said. You're just here for the magic show. But if he takes Jesus at his word and goes back to his son without Jesus, he risks losing his son. Because Jesus The miracle worker isn't coming with him. What a quandary. What should he do? Well, we know the story. He leaves. He goes back. While he's on his way, some of his servants come out to meet him. Your son is alive. Your son is alive. Your son is... When? When did that happen? And the man finds out that at the exact hour that Jesus said, go, your son will live, his son was healed. And so we read the commentary that this man and all his household believed. Sign number 2, reaction, received Jesus, royal official, and all his household. Did not receive Jesus. I have a question mark there. Because Jesus says in verse 48 to a group of the Jews around there, he admonishes them and says, unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe. Now, if you're following along, if you're paying attention in John's gospel, you can feel the heat begin to rise. Sign number 3, go to John chapter 5. This is the healing of the invalid, the paralytic, the lame man at the pool of Bethesda. Verses 16, 17, and 18. And this was why the Jews were persecuting Jesus. That's an important term, the Jews. We'll come back to that. Because he, Jesus, was doing these things on the Sabbath. But Jesus answered them, my Father is working until now, and I am working. This is why the Jews were seeking all the more to kill him, because not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but they understood exactly what he was saying. He was claiming to, in effect, be God in the flesh, claiming God as his Father, making himself equal with God. Sign number 3, reaction, receive Jesus, the invalid, the paralytic, the lame man. Did not receive Jesus, the Jews. Now, right here I put the Jews in quotes because I want to make a distinction. Later on, there are going to be the Jews, John calls them the Jews, that actually receive Jesus. The Jews here, you have to hear them as the religious leadership, the chief priests, the Pharisees, not the Sanhedrin yet, not the full Sanhedrin, not the Sadducees yet, but predominantly the chief priests and the Pharisees. So the religious leadership is beginning to reject Jesus. And we're going to see that ramp up. And in the coming weeks, as we walk through the last week of Jesus' life, it comes to a fever pitch. And you know the end of the story. They actually kill Jesus. They actually have him crucified. Did not receive Jesus, the Jews. So that's sign number 3. Sign number 4. And as I said earlier, I think it's entirely appropriate to see the feeding of the 5,000 and Jesus walking on water as a sign, singular. So in John chapter 6, verses 14 and 15, when the people saw the sign that he had done, they said, this is indeed the prophet who is to come into the world. Perceiving then that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, Jesus withdrew again to the mountain by himself. For those in the theology class this morning, this is exactly what I was talking about. They saw the Messiah as a political king who would restore the nation back to Israel. They didn't see the first coming. So they're looking ahead to the second advent, what we now know as the second advent. But they didn't see the first advent or the first coming of Jesus as the suffering servant. They just saw the Messiah as king who will restore the nation back to its former glory. And then chapter 6, verses 24 and 25. When the crowd, same group of people, found Jesus on the other side of the sea, they said to him, Rabbi, when did you come here? Jesus answered them, truly, truly, I say to you, you are seeking me not because you saw signs, but because your bellies are full. Sign number 4, reaction. Those who receive Jesus, the disciples, but they are so slow to understand. Did not receive Jesus, the people, the crowd. You have to see it's the same group of people who are at the feeding of the 5,000, and then they meet Jesus on the other side of the lake after he walks on water. That's why I see that as a sign. Sign number 5, the healing of the man born blind, and things really begin to ramp up here in terms of reaction between Jesus and the Jews, the religious leadership, the religious establishment. Extended passage here. I'm going to begin at verse 35. Jesus heard that they had cast the man born blind out, that is, out of the synagogue. Now we can read that and think, okay, no big deal, got cast out of church. No, it's a major deal, because the synagogue was the community center. You got kicked out of the synagogue, and what that meant is you got kicked out of communal life. You were isolated. You were on your own. So the religious leadership, the Jews, kicked the man born blind. What did he do? He just bore witness, and he starts to give it back a little bit to the Jews, and they said, "You're gone." So Jesus finds him later. And having found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" He answered, "And who is he, sir, that I may believe in him?" Jesus said to him, "You have seen him, and it is he who has spoken to you." He said, the man who had been born blind, who now has his sight, "Lord, I believe." And he worshiped him. Jesus said, "For judgment I came into this world, that those who do not see may see, and those who see may become blind." Some of the Pharisees near him heard these things and said to him, "Are we also blind?" Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would have no guilt. But now that you say we see, your guilt remains." Sign number 5 reaction: receive Jesus, the man born blind. Did not receive Jesus, the man born blind's neighbors, parents, the Pharisees, and the Jews. The Pharisees being part of the Jews. So now, if you've been kind of paying attention here, things are getting ramped up. Those who are saying no to Jesus, that number is increasing. Sign number 6, of course, is Lazarus. And this is a sign that John spends an unusual amount of time, because I think part of it is he's alerting us this is a transition point, leaving Jesus' public ministry, as I said earlier, essentially the rest of his gospel, final week of Jesus' life. So we went over this last week, but in kind of a preface to John chapter 12, 11 verse 53. So from that day on, what day? The raising of Lazarus. So from that day on, they, the Jews, made plans to put Jesus to death. Jesus, therefore, no longer walked openly among the Jews, but went from there to the region near the wilderness, to a town called Ephraim, and there he stayed with the disciples. Now the Passover of the Jews was at hand, and many went up from the country to Jerusalem before the Passover to purify themselves. They were looking for Jesus and saying to one another as they stood in the temple, "So what do you think? You think he's going to come? You think he's going to show up?" Now, the chief priests and the Pharisees had given orders that if anyone knew where he was, that person should let them know, so they could arrest Jesus. That brings us to our text today, John chapter 12, the first 11 verses. So in the previous signs, John uses a contrast, going all the way back to his first chapter. The world did not receive Jesus. The Jews did not receive Jesus. But to any who did receive Jesus, he gave the right to become children of God. And so John uses those 6 signs, and the 7th being the resurrection, to create that contrast between those who received and those who rejected Jesus. John chapter 12, first 11 verses, we see 2 contrasts. Contrast between Mary, the sister of Martha and Lazarus and Judas. And then we see the Jews, kind of small t, not the Jews, the Jewish leadership, but just, we might say, regular, normal Jews who also believed in Jesus because of the sign of Lazarus. And they're contrasted with the Pharisees and the chief priests who continue to reject Jesus. So sign number 6, receive Jesus. Mary and the Jews, also Lazarus and Martha, did not receive Jesus, the chief priests and the Pharisees. All right, that was probably the longest introduction I have ever given in a sermon. And we're almost done. Okay. I think you could break up these 11 verses in 3 acts. Act number 1, verses 1 through 3. Act number 2, verses 4 through 8. And then act number 3, verses 9 through 11. John chapter 12. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus therefore came to Bethany, where Lazarus was. Note what John does here. He's bringing Lazarus again to a place of prominence, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. He is continuing that sign. So they gave a dinner for him there. Some translations say a banquet. Martha served, and Lazarus was one of those reclining with him at table. Now, I take issue a little bit about what you saw on the screen. I don't think that's entirely accurate. There's a difference between other places Jesus sat at a table, but here it said he was reclining at the table. And that means one of two things. My wife and I were with missionaries from the Middle East many, many years ago, and we actually ate a meal like this. So don't think table, all right? The problem is, will I be able to get up? So, the table is here, okay? The feet are away from the table, and you're resting on one arm, and you eat with the other hand, okay? It's either that was common, or there may have been cushions here as well. But it probably wasn't what you saw in the video. It probably wasn't them seating at the table, which gives us a visual of what Mary did to Jesus' feet. Jesus' feet were down here. Does that visual help? Does that make sense? Okay, this is tables here, food's here, and everybody's head is at the table. So that's probably what it was. And this was a banquet, probably thrown by Simon. I made it. Probably thrown by a man by the name of Simon in Jesus' honor. Why does John include in Jesus' honor? Something's about to happen, isn't it? This is John alerting us. Something major is about to happen. Enter Mary. Mary, therefore, took a pound of expensive ointment, highly likely that it would have been in that day a year's wages. So this was no small cost to her. This was a major cost to her. Made from pure nard and anointed, that's crucial, that word anointed, the feet of Jesus and wiped his feet with her hair. The house was filled with the fragrance of the unmistakable. It was unmistakable what Mary had done. I'm going to come back to that. Verse 4, here's the contrast. But Judas Iscariot, one of his disciples, he who was about to betray him, whenever you read about Jesus in the Gospels, it doesn't matter which one, you always see that commentary after his name. The betrayer, the one who was to betray him, said, why was this ointment not, he totally does not get what's going on. His heart is hard. He does not understand what's going on here. Why was this ointment not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor? He said this not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. And having charge of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. Jesus said, comes to her defense, back off. That's kind of my verbiage. Leave her alone, so that she may keep it for the day of my burial. For the poor you will always have with you, but you do not always have me. Mary got something there, guys. She understood something. Verse 9, second contrast. When the large crowd of the Jews learned that Jesus was there, they came, not only account of him, but also to see the sign, but also to see Lazarus, whom Jesus raised from the dead. So, verse 10, the chief priests made plans to put, what did Lazarus do? Jesus said, come out of the tomb. He came out of the tomb, dead. The chief priests what is wrong with the chief priests? You have to visualize this. You have to see the hardness of their hearts. Lazarus was dead. He is now standing right in front of them. The evidence is there. In my closing points to ponder, kind of give it a little show right now. Buying into or rejecting Jesus is not primarily an evidence issue. There's plenty of evidence. There is plenty of evidence for the resurrection. There is plenty of evidence for the legitimacy of Christianity. If you want it, you can find it. Evidence is important. It is not primarily an evidence issue. It's primarily a heart issue. The evidence is there. Lazarus was staring them in the face. The evidence of a resurrection was staring them in the face, and yet they wanted to kill him. So the chief priests made plans to put Lazarus to death as well, because on account of him, watch this, many of the Jews were going away and believing in Jesus. Now the Jews there, different, like I said earlier, just common Jewish people, not the Jewish religious leadership. As an aside, this has nothing to do with the message, but just something I've kicked around from time to time, and there's no charge for this. Lazarus was in the grave how many days? 4. 4 days. What did he see on the other side? You ever think about that? I don't believe the Bible teaches soul sleep. What did he experience on the other side that we're never told about? That's one of those spots where I'm like, God, seriously? Could you not have, thrown us a bone? Yeah, nice. I love it. Did you hear her? You have to wait your turn. That's genius. I wish I'd have said that. That's good. Mary versus Judas. Oh my gosh. What did it cost her? What did it cost her? And I'm not talking about the perfume. What did it cost her in social standing? Because what she did, anointed, you don't do that. As a woman, you don't do that. You serve, you bring the food, you take the dishes away, but that's all you do. You don't let down your hair in public. Jewish women rarely did that. What did it? You know what? She didn't care. That's convicting. How many times do I fear man more than God? I should say something, but what will people think? She didn't care. Wow. Then Judas pipes in. Totally, talk about a mood stealer. What is she doing? Because he didn't care. You see the difference? You have to see that. If you're going to get this story, you have to see they both didn't care, but for different, like radically different, like in kingdom, not in kingdom reasons. Chief priests, many of the Jews, sometimes the application is so obvious that I almost feel like I'm actually, and I'm being serious, like I'm insulting your intelligence by bringing some application points or points to ponder. But I'm going to do it anyway. Points to ponder. Point number one. When it comes to Jesus, there is no neutral position. There is no neutral territory. There is no Switzerland. There's no standing on the sidelines. That place doesn't exist. You're either with him or you're not with him. It is that simple. No fence riding. John is telling us, like he's boldly telling us, you either receive him or you reject him. That's it. Those are the two choices in this life. That's it. I tell you what, you let that sink in a little bit, and all of a sudden, the picture becomes pretty unfuzzy, doesn't it? It brings a lot of things into clarity, doesn't it? It is that simple. Receive him or reject him. To this point in John's gospel, that has been a major theme. Here are the signs. Here's the proof. Where's your heart? Number two, I mentioned this earlier. Receiving or rejecting Jesus is not primarily an evidence issue. It's primarily a heart issue. Christianity is, oh my gosh, it's not lacking in evidence. Other faith systems are, like majorly lacking in evidence. Christianity, no, it's there. It's not an evidence issue. Please don't hear what I'm not saying. Present the evidence. The Holy Spirit uses the evidence to break down walls. Present the evidence. Your evidence. If you're a Christian, you're a living witness. That's what the word martyr means, to witness. We are living dead people, if you want to look at it that way, who bear witness to the risen Savior. Probably the best apologetic you have is your life. So bear witness, absolutely. But when the day is done, it's not an evidence issue, not primarily. Evidence is important, but it's not primary. What's going on in the heart? And you don't know that, and I don't know that, but the Holy Spirit does. And you trust him to work behind the scenes. I think the final 3 points are probably most important. Point number 3. Receiving Jesus costs everything. Let that sink in. Receiving Jesus costs everything. Point number 4. Rejecting Jesus costs everything. Let that sink in. Mary didn't care, and Judas didn't care. And it cost both of them everything. One is right now with Jesus in the kingdom. The other right now is without Jesus outside of the kingdom.